everyone. This is Puya Hamami, healthcare analyst with Edison. And today we have Ian Crosbie, the CEO of Sequana Medical, who will provide us with the latest insights as to how Sequana plans to tackle fluid overload conditions in several areas, including liver disease and heart failure. So hello, Ian. So please let us know about refractive ascites, how prevalent it is, and how it affects patients. And why do current treatments leave much to be desired, and how can the alpha pump make a significant improvement in quality of life?
Hey, thank you for that, and appreciate the invitation to present the company today. So refractory ascites is a really much underestimated disease and much underappreciated. It is something which has a major impact on the life of patients with chronic liver disease. Prevalence today in the US is probably something in the order of 20 to 40,000 patients, but that market is forecast to change dramatically over the coming years as the markets shift from liver cirrhosis being driven by alcohol and viral hepatitis towards the market being driven by still by alcohol, but now NASH playing a major role in expanding the prevalence of liver cirrhosis. So liver ascites is a complication of liver cirrhosis. The liver is a wonderful organ, but once it gets scarred, that causes the blood flow through the liver to be disrupted. And as that resistance increases, the liver starts to leak, and it leaks about maybe a liter of fluid a day. It's a proteinous fluid. It's not blood, but it's a proteinous plasma type fluid, leaks out of the liver and goes into the abdominal cavity where it builds up. And this fluid accumulates day by day. So over 2 weeks, these patients are carrying about 15 liters of fluid. Just imagine carrying 15 bottles of Evian around in your belly. Could you eat? Could you breathe? Could you walk? Could you sleep? Can you turn over? Can you function? Do your guts still work? And this is the life these patients have to live with. So what we can do, we constantly drain the fluid out of the belly. So instead of this fluid building up, what we do is we constantly pump the fluid from the abdominal cavity into the bladder, where the patient just naturally urinates the fluid away. So they don't have the fluid build up, they don't have the big swelling, they don't have this big weight to carry around, and they can live their life relatively normally.
And the current treatments right now for ascites, I mean, they have some major, quality of life issues. Can you maybe just elaborate on that a little?
Oh, sure, because the in reality, the treatment for ascites hasn't changed in about 2,000 years. It was invented by the ancient Egyptians, and frankly, is the same treatment that it was then. So all that happens is the fluid's allowed to build up in the abdominal cavity. It's a sealed bag. Every couple of weeks, you go into hospital, and it takes 5 to 7 hours. They put a large needle into that fluid and into the belly, and you lie there, and the fluid gets drained. You have to do it under medical supervision because of the impact on the body of doing this. It's painful, it's burdensome, it's inconvenient, tremendous impact of quality of life. The day of the treatment itself is not the big issue. It's a relatively routine procedure. The complication rate is low, but the big problem is the week before each drainage. You can't function. You basically have no life. So that is the major treatment. This is called paracentesis or drainage. And as I said, frankly, there's been no drive to change this treatment in the last 2,000 years. But now, with the market changing from that of alcoholic cirrhosis and hepatitis towards NASH, which is a mainstream disease, there's a fundamental drive to provide a 21st century solution for this treatment.
Okay, good. So the alpha pump makes a significant potential improvement. And so how easy is it for the alpha pump to be used by the patient on a day-to-day basis?
So after the alpha pump has been inserted, to start off with, the alpha pump has to be inserted. It's a procedure that takes about 60 minutes, done by an interventional radiologist in the US. The patient, because they're in a very fragile condition, because of their advanced disease, will probably have to spend a couple of days in hospital. But once they leave, frankly, all the patient has to do is to charge up the device for about 20 minutes a day using a handheld charger. So it's wirelessly charged, just like your mobile phone. You hold the charging pad over the pump, just on the outside of the skin. Takes about 20 minutes. It lights up when it's connected, so there's no question whether it's connected or not. And during that period of time, while we are charging the pump, we are also collecting the data from that pump. That data gets sent back to us and we send a report onto the physician. So the physician has a much better idea of how the pump is performing and how the patient is performing. And then the physician has a much closer idea on keeping track of that patient. So all it is about 20 minutes a day for the patient.
And they can avoid all the hospitalization and having to go on a weekly basis for these drainages thing.
Absolutely. We are currently running our pivotal study, the Poseidon trial in North America. We've released data from the first 26 patients from the rolling cohort, and we've shown in these patients that we've managed to eliminate more than 90% of the drainages that these patients are required to undergo. The FDA for this pivotal trial has asked as an endpoint to achieve at least a 50% reduction in the rate of drainage, but we are achieving well over 90% in these patients. So it's very clear that we can transform these patients' lives. These patients don't want these patients don't want to be in the Olympics. They don't want to suddenly to be able to regain their youth, but these patients want the simple things in life. They want to be able to go and visit their friends. They want to be able to cook. They want to be able to drive. They want to be able to travel, not worried about when the next visit to hospital is going to be. Their partner wants to know that if they leave the house, the partner is not going to be flat on the floor, unable to function. These patients just want the simple things in life to enjoy the remaining days that they have. And that's all that we're being asked for these patients is let us allow these patients to live the life that they really want.
And what does it mean for alfapump to have the FDA breakthrough status designation? How does that change or affect the development?
Sure, no, that's great. The FDA has done this really bold initiative over a number of years, which is it identifies diseases, important diseases, where the current treatments are not really delivering the right level of care or improvement in quality of life or clinical benefit to these patients. And if a device has the ability to change dramatically the care or diagnosis of an important medical indication, then the FDA may designate that device a breakthrough device. And in doing that, it has a number of benefits. First of all, the FDA, we have a much closer dialogue with the FDA, much more interactive approach to designing the trial and getting it approved and to dealing with questions as we go through the trial. But in addition to that, it's important because when it comes to reimbursement, CMS, because most of our patients are going to be Medicare patients, have also set up initiatives like NTAP and MCIT, which will improve the reimbursement for these breakthrough devices. So that will really help us to get this device into the hands of physicians who can transform and change the lives of these Medicare patients much more quickly than it would through traditional channels. And thirdly, doctors and centers and patients, frankly, are much more excited about working with a breakthrough device than they are with an incremental device. So we find there's a much better dialogue with physicians, with patients, with ethics committees, and other groups where they want to be working with these devices where the FDA has identified there a clear clinical need, and the products like the alfapump have the ability to deliver important clinical benefits within the coming years.
Okay, and you touched on this earlier, but you're mentioning there was a changing patient demographic, and how would that affect the growth opportunity for alfapump and liver ascites? More to NASH.
That's critical. That's critical because for thousands of years, liver cirrhosis has really been driven by two key causes. There has been alcoholic liver disease, and there's been viral hepatitis. Both of these cause the scarring of the liver, and this hasn't really changed for thousands of years. And unfortunately, in many cases, these patients are not deemed to have the highest priority by healthcare systems. But what is changing now is NASH. There's obviously been a lot of news out there in the press about NASH and healthy livers going to fatty liver and then NASH. But what is not talked about is the fact that when NASH progresses, NASH is an inflammation, a scarring of the liver. But when that inflammation progresses, it turns into cirrhosis. Exactly the same cirrhosis of alcohol, of hepatitis, and causes the same complications. But the patient groups are very different. Instead of being the traditional alcoholic liver disease patients or the traditional viral hepatitis groups, we're getting patients where the cause is obesity. It's a very slow moving disease. Many of these patients will be in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s by the time that they develop the ascites as a result of this cirrhosis. But this is affecting our grandparents' generation right now. 1 in 4 of the patients in our pivotal trial in the US have ascites due to NASH. And this is going from a disease which is driving it towards a mainstream disease. And that is changing the way the FDA is treating it, the way reimbursement agencies are treating it. And that's why it's important to deliver a 21st solution for people just like our grandparents today.
Well, with alfapump now in pivotal studies, when do you believe it's going to hit the market, and what are your plans for its commercialization in the United States and North America?
Sure, we obviously have to deliver on the data for the trial. That's the most important. It's the most important part. We expect to complete enrollment of patients in our trial. We are forecasting completion of enrollment in our trial at the end of the summer this year. If we do that, then we should be announcing the primary endpoint for the study about 11 to 12 months later. So at the end of the summer next year, we should be reporting the primary endpoint. And that is what we will be filing with FDA and Health Canada. And we forecast that we can file by the end of next year. The amount of time the FDA and Health Canada take to review is variable, but if we take the middle case in our estimate, that's about 1 further year for a review. So hopefully by the end of 2023, this product, subject to the data being good enough, obviously in a positive review, we hope that the FDA and Health Canada will approve this product for commercial launch, and then we'll be able to launch this product into US and Canada, and we plan to do that direct through our own sales force that we will establish here. The reason why we do it ourselves rather than through a partner is because there is no high-value medical device sales force focusing on the hepatologist. So our target customer is the hepatologist, the liver doctor. And currently there is no real medical device sales force focusing on them. So we will establish our own, and we can concentrate this through the liver transplant centers in North America. There's 140 of these in the US, and our initial focus is to target the top half. We believe we can do this with about 35 sales reps for a total team size of, say, 50 people. Second year, we'd hope to expand that to all of those centers with a team that'll be 80 to 100 persons is our forecast. But we believe we can do this very effectively and in a very focused manner, and to drive it ourselves. When bringing a new therapy, we believe it's important to do that yourself, so you really have hands-on feedback from the community and listen to their needs and deliver a tailored message to them. It's very exciting to be able to bring this firsthand and have full control to do this, and we're looking forward to having the product on the US market.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting. And actually, with the alfapump, I mean, we've discussed how it's been able to remove excess fluid from the abdomen. But let us know about how the technology can also be leveraged with another technology that Sequana has, DSR, and how we can use that to treat heart failure congestion.
Yeah. So look, the focus of Sequana Medical is fluid overload in general. Many medical conditions, whether it's liver failure, heart failure, cancer, or kidney failure, all have a complication where there is excess fluid in the body. So in liver disease, it's called ascites. In heart failure, it's called congestion. And in renal failure, it's intradialectic weight gain. So all of these specialties have their own terminology, but the problem is there's too much fluid in the body. For the most part, you can treat it with diuretic pills, water pills, Lasix, furosemide. These drugs have been around for decades. They're very effective. They're very cheap. They're very well proven. They're easy to take. The problem is that in many cases, these drugs stop working with these patients. And when they do, it's a real clinical problem. So our focus is on diuretic-resistant fluid overload. And in heart failure, as I mentioned, it's called congestion. You've probably heard of congestive heart failure. This time, the fluid is not conveniently collecting in the abdominal cavity, it's collecting all across the body. So what we do is we do a technique where we use the body to help us get the fluid out of the body. In particular, we use the kidneys. You and I and everybody listening to this will have a very similar concentration of sodium in their bloodstream. about 135 millimoles per liter. If it goes too high or too low, we die pretty quickly. So the kidneys are very well attuned to be very effective working with the brain to maintain that fluid balance, typically by getting rid of excess fluid out of the body. So what we do is we absolutely use the kidneys. Then what we do is we go in and in patients that are diuretic resistant, their kidneys are not getting the fluid and the sodium out of the body. We step in and we extract sodium from the body. When we extract sodium from the body, the brain and the kidneys now see too much fluid in the body, and they act accurately, quickly, and very precisely to bring the sodium concentration back into line. The only way they can do this is by extracting the fluid, that fluid overload, and that is what we do with what we call our direct sodium removal technology. And to do this, we put a sodium-free solution into our abdominal cavities. Our abdominal cavities are like our lungs, very thin cell wall, very large surface area, very well served by the bloodstream, just like the lungs. We put this sodium-free solution in that sucks sodium out of the bloodstream into that solution. We then take away that solution, which now has lots of sodium in it. And once it's been removed, the body has lost sodium, and then it has to get rid of the free water, as I've just described. And the kidney and the brain does the hard work. We do the very simple work by taking out the sodium. And then the body does the smart work by bringing the body into line by getting rid of the free water. That is direct sodium removal, and we combine it with the alpha pump to create a long-term chronic therapy for these patients that's in development called alfapump DSR.
At that stage, once patients are at the diuretic-resistant heart failure congestion stage, what are the current options for them before the DSR, and how large is the opportunity in your view? Effectively, what kind of impact can alfapump DSR have on these patients?
So congestive heart failure is pretty well known and well understood. There's about 6.5 million Americans with heart failure, but there's an estimated 200,000 of them who are believed to be diuretic resistant and repeatedly go into hospital each year, the so-called frequent flyers. So what happens is these patients are treated with ever increasing doses of diuretics, but over time the diuretics stop working. They get higher and higher doses, the fluid continues to accumulate, and the kidneys start to deteriorate. And the doctors are faced with a challenge there, which is, can I continue to remove the fluid from these patients where this fluid makes it hard to move around, makes it a weakened pump the heart is having to pump even more fluid around the body with higher blood pressure. So it's becoming even harder on this damaged heart. So do I make the conditions better for the heart by damaging the kidney, or do I protect the kidney by letting the heart accumulate the fluid? So at some point in time, these patients will what's called become decompensated. They will get fluid accumulation, and the doctors really can't treat them using their normal drug therapy. They will often get admitted to hospital. There are 1 million hospitalizations each year in the US for heart failure. 90% of those are due to symptoms of congestion. It is not often the patient clutching their chest or struggling to walk down the street. It is the patient struggling to breathe because their lungs are filling with water. So 90% of those 1 million hospitalizations is due to congestion, and the total bill for those hospitalizations is $13 billion a year. So it's a huge target for us to go after, one of the largest categories for Medicare billing in the US and each year. So that is the target that we're going after. Current treatment options are doctors bring the patients into hospital. They get administered even more powerful versions of these drugs, intravenous loop diuretics. This works in many cases, but it probably only works overall in about half of these patients. It is estimated that half of these patients are sent home with no change in their weight after 5 days in hospital. So no fluid has come out, and we see the problem here because a quarter of these patients are back in hospital within 30 days. It's very expensive. It's a huge impact on the healthcare system, and it's a huge impact on the quality of life. Every visit to hospital is a step up in mortality risk for these patients. So effectively decongesting the patients, effectively restoring the function of their kidneys are critical objectives. And unfortunately at the moment, Once a diuretic stopped working, there's very limited options out there for the doctors.
Fortunately, in our case, in Sequana's case, is that it already has studied the alfapump DSR system in a human trial. The Red Desert feasibility study has already shown some potential benefits of the alfapump DSR. What do you think are the key findings of this study, and what are the next steps of development for alfapump DSR?
No, it's great. Red Desert was the first time we were ever able to treat heart failure patients repeatedly with DSR therapy. So these patients who were all on high doses of diuretics had an alpha pump system fitted in them, and we stopped their existing drug therapy on a cliff edge. So the study started, they had the alpha pump fitted, and we replaced their high doses of diuretic drugs with repeated DSR therapy instead. And we showed over the 6 weeks of this therapy that, number one, we could manage the fluid and sodium balance of these patients. Their fluid balance was kept under good control using DSR therapy. And at the beginning of the study, we tested their kidneys, and their kidneys were all poor responders to diuretic drugs. They were so-called diuretic-resistant. We did this again at the end of the study, and now the kidney had come back to normal again. Its response had increased on average by 150%, so going from a diuretic-resistant kidney to a diuretic-responsive kidney. That was very exciting. But what was outstanding to us is this effect was still seen 10 months later. So when the study finished, these patients obviously were no longer getting DSR, and they were going back on to much lower doses of their normal diuretics again once the study had finished. And we expected that effect to disappear relatively quickly. But what we were surprised at is at a median follow-up of 10 months, these patients were on 80% less oral diuretics than they were when they came on the study. 80%, much more manageable dose. The kidneys were able to work in partnership with these diuretics, and the body was doing most of the work in managing the fluid balance of these patients. These patients were stable, their weight was stable, and now we had the kidney in a position where it could work with much lower levels of diuretics to maintain the fluid balance. And also the kidney was in a much better state of health. Typically, the normal history is that you can either get good diuretic response or you can get an improvement in renal function. You couldn't get both historically. Now, for the first time with DSR therapy in Red Desert trial, we saw that we could not only improve the diuretic response of the kidney, but we could also improve the health of the kidney, the so-called eGFR, a measure of kidney health. That improved by about 22%. Creatinine, which is a measure of kidney failure, fell as well. So we were getting the heart better, we were getting the diuretic response better, and we were getting the kidney better. So we were putting the body back in a shape to better manage this fluid balance and to let the patient manage the disease better themselves. Obviously, over time, the condition will decline again, and they would need another dose of DSR therapy here. That's the natural history of the disease here. But we were allowing these patients to live a relatively normal life in the months in between treatment, and that is what Red Desert showed. We are now starting, or we have already started, in fact, the Sahara trial. Again, we are now treating heart failure patients, but a slightly sicker group of patients now. Patients with excess fluid at the beginning of the study, patients with so-called persistent congestion. And what we are looking to do is, can we, over a 2 or 4 or 6 week period, get rid of that excess congestion, the fluid that their drugs can't get rid of? Can we get them back to their correct weight now? Can we take the burden off their heart? Can we also restore the condition of their kidneys, improving this renal response over a short period of time? And then we will then stop the treatment after a few weeks. We'll either do it after 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on how long the kidney takes to recover. And then we'll follow them for a further 4 months to see how long the benefit lasts. So what we're looking now is in our real patient group, in a real treatment scenario, to say, how long does it take to get rid of the excess fluid, and how long does the benefit of this therapy last? So very exciting trial, because that will give us a real indication of what real life therapy would look like for this novel breakthrough approach.
Very, very exciting. And Sequana recently started a standalone short-term DSR program. And how does this differ from the alfapump DSR package? And where do you see the commercial pathways for each of them?
With DSR, as I mentioned, we put this sodium-free solution into the abdominal cavity to pull the sodium out of the body. That itself is a drug. It's treated by a drug by the regulators. So what we're doing is we are setting up a program where we separate the drug, this so-called infusate, from the alpha pump, and we believe that we can more rapidly progress this infusate on a standalone basis through the regulators and through development, and get the benefit to the patient sooner by having a therapy which is based upon not using the alpha pump, but by using a traditional external catheter here. This will allow doctors to get the benefit of the therapy quicker without implanting the alpha pump over, say, a 2 or 4 week period, and see in their own hands, does DSR work in these particular patients? We believe that in the US, it's important to have a fully integrated system where the fluid is, you don't have external catheters and the patients can go around without any burden or impact on their ability to function. But we believe that doing short-term DSR is an important step to gaining confidence and gaining experience in the US clinical community and gaining a more rapid path to market here than pursuing the fully integrated systems. Combining drugs and devices together is a more complicated route through the regulators. So we believe that getting the drug approved on a standalone basis and then combining up with our alpha pump, which by that point should also be approved from the liver indication, will be a lower risk and a smoother regulatory pathway than trying to put the two products together as a novel therapy here.
So now, if we try to put everything as a whole, looking at Sequana, what's the current cash runway? And generally, what are the next catalysts and milestones that we should expect for Sequana?
Great. We've announced to the market that we've got cash runway into the second quarter of 2022. So we have a decent runway, but not total luxury there. So in terms of milestones, the next milestone to look out for is post-summer, where we'll be looking to complete enrollment in the Poseidon trial, and that will then set the timing for the announcement of the primary endpoint for the trial. If we complete enrollment as planned by the end of Q3 this year, then we should be on track to report the primary endpoint post-summer 2022, and then file our PMA, our application with the FDA, by the end of next year, end of 2022. And then hopefully, if the review is 1 year, approval, if it comes, will be the end of 2023. On the heart failure side, we will be reporting interim data from our Sahara trial, and that's planned by the end of this year. And then we'll be reporting top-line data from the Sahara trial in the second half of next year. And we'll also be kicking off our first short-term DSR trial in the United States, the so-called Mojave trial, before the end of next year. So those are the key milestones there to be looking out for.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ian, and letting us know of these exciting developments for Sequana Medical and for the patients who may benefit from these technologies. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you.